My name is Nora Calloway. I am 38 years old. And on the third Sunday of December, at the dining room table I grew up eating at, in the house at 42 Harwell Drive in Columbus, Ohio, my brother Derek raised his glass of eggnog, looked across 11 people, and delivered the word he had always privately kept in reserve for me, as if he had been carrying it in his coat pocket for decades, waiting for an audience worthy of the moment. "I just want to say something," he said, and the room quieted the way rooms do when a person with a very loud personality demands it. "I want to say something about family, about who shows up and who doesn't, about who has been here and who has been. Let's be honest about this." He paused. He had always been theatrical about the wrong things. A freeloader. He was looking at me when he said it. My Aunt Carol's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Derek's wife, Lisa, dropped her eyes to the tablecloth. My mother, Ruth, 68 years old, put down her water glass very carefully and said his name. "Derek." He waved her off. "No, Mom, someone has to say it. Dad's been gone 6 years. 6 years. And in those 6 years, who has been here? Who drove you to your cardiology appointment back in March? Who fixed the porch in September? Who shows up? Me. I show up. And Nora flies in twice a year, eats your food, sleeps in your guest room, and contributes what? What exactly? Nothing. She's a freeloader, Mom. She always has been. And I think it's time someone said it." I didn't say a word. I didn't set down my fork too firmly or push back my chair or look at Brian, my husband, sitting beside me, though I felt his hand shift almost imperceptibly on the table as if steadying something inside him. I looked at Derek, calmly, quietly, the way you look at a clock. I counted. What they didn't know, what no one at that table knew except my mother, and only in the most carefully arranged way, was that for the past 72 months, I had been wiring $12,000 every single month into a dedicated account that kept that house standing, that mother breathing, and Nat Brothers' comfortable illusions propped up on a foundation he had never once thought to examine. Not once in 6 years had Derek Calloway asked a single honest question about where the money came from. He just assumed, as certain people always do, that the warmth was simply there, like weather, and that he had nothing to do with creating it. This is that story. To understand what happened at that dinner table and what came after it, you need to understand a few things about the Calloway family, about the house at 42 Harwell Drive, and about the very particular and very consistent way I had been made invisible for most of my life. My father, Glenn Calloway, spent 31 years as a foreman at an industrial manufacturing company in Columbus. He was a steady, careful man with money, the kind who kept a handwritten ledger in the kitchen drawer and reviewed it every Sunday night after dinner. He was not a warm man, and he was not a cold one. He was a man who expressed love through function, making sure the gutters were clean, the car was serviced, and the heating oil was ordered before the first frost settled in. He died of a cardiac event on a Tuesday morning in February 6 years ago in the parking lot of the grocery store 2 miles from the house. He was 62. He had gone to buy milk. My mother, Ruth, had worked part-time as a bookkeeper for a local church for 15 years, mostly because she liked the people and the purpose, not because she needed the income. When my father died, she had a paid-off house, his pension, which was modest, $2,400 a month, and a savings account with $11,000. She had no investments, no financial advisor, and no secondary income. She had 2 children. Derek Marcus Calloway, 44 years old, was the firstborn and for 4 years, the only child. Derek had been the boy my father could point to with something approaching pride at church, at the plant, at neighborhood cookouts. He played football in high school, not brilliantly, but conspicuously, which in our world was almost the same thing. He attended Ohio State for 2 years and then transferred to a smaller school in Cincinnati, when his grades made the decision for him. He married Lisa, a cheerful, easygoing woman whom everyone genuinely liked, because she never asked the kind of questions that complicated a room. Derek settled into a sales management role at a mid-sized logistics company in Dublin, Ohio. He made a comfortable living, He drove a new gray truck with a leather interior that cost him $812 a month. He took his family to Myrtle Beach every July. He was, in every visible way, the shape of success that our father had recognized and celebrated, and he had been cashing that recognition like a check for 30 years. I was the second child, born 4 years after Derek, a daughter nobody had particularly planned for, and who arrived anyway with a quiet stubbornness that would define every decade that followed. I was not rebellious. I was not dramatic or difficult. I was simply interested in things that the people around me did not think to look for. While Derek's Friday night football games drew both parents to the stadium every week without exception, I was in the school library constructing a business model for a mock company I had invented for a class project. My teacher, a woman named Mrs. DiPietro, pulled me aside one afternoon and told me quietly that I had a remarkable mind for systems. My parents were not in that room to hear it, and no one thought to repeat it to them. I earned a full academic scholarship to Ohio University. I didn't tell my parents for 3 days after the acceptance letter arrived because I wasn't certain they would understand the significance of it. When I finally showed my father the letter at dinner, he looked at it for a moment, said, long drive, and handed it back. The following month, when Derek announced he had been accepted to Ohio State, my mother made his favorite meal: pot roast, fresh biscuits, apple pie, and my father opened a bottle of bourbon he had been saving for something. I have thought about that bottle of bourbon many times since. After graduation, I took a job in operations at a logistics firm in Cincinnati. I was 22 and I worked long weeks and studied every system around me, with the focus of someone who knows that no one is watching, and that no one watching is precisely the advantage. I learned supply chain logistics, vendor contract structures, process optimization, how a business moves when it is working and how it stutters when it is not. I took every opportunity to understand things I had not been assigned to understand. I was not trying to be noticed. I was trying to become someone so thoroughly capable that being noticed would eventually be unavoidable. At 26, I was recruited by a consulting firm in Austin, Texas. I packed everything I owned into a rented cargo van, drove 14 hours south, and started over in a city where my last name appeared on nothing. In those early Austin years, I learned something that has stayed with me. Competence is quiet, but it accumulates. By the time you realize how much you have built, you have been building for a long time without marking the progress. At 30, I founded Callaway Consulting Group, serving mid-market operations clients across the Midwest and Southwest. I hired carefully. I priced correctly. I kept my word on every engagement and turned down work that would have required me to compromise on either. By 35, the firm had 12 employees and a client list that included 3 publicly traded companies. By the December dinner where my brother called me a freeloader in front of 11 people, we were billing $4.2 million annually, and I employed 19 people full-time. No one in my family knew the scale of any of this, not because I had concealed it, because not one of them had ever asked. I want to be specific about that, because it matters. I did not hide my success. I did not pretend to be small. When my mother asked how work was going, I answered honestly. When Kay, my cousin, asked at that December dinner table about my firm, I answered her question directly and with accuracy. The information was available to anyone who wanted to reach for it. Derek had simply never reached. He had constructed a version of me, the younger sister who had moved away and done some unremarkable thing in another city, who drifted in twice a year for holidays and contributed nothing of substance. And he had maintained that version with the same uncritical confidence with which he maintained most of his beliefs about the world, not out of malice exactly, out of incuriosity, which in the long run amounts to the same thing. There are 2 moments in the years before that December that you need to understand, because without them, nothing that came after makes sense. The first happened in March of the year I turned 31. I was in Columbus for a long weekend. A client meeting nearby had given me the excuse I always needed to add a day at Harwell Drive. Derek and Lisa joined for Saturday dinner with their 2 kids, Max then 7 and Callie then 4. The evening ran pleasantly enough until Derek began describing his new truck with the particular loving detail some men reserve for their most prized possessions. He named the trim level, the color, the heated steering wheel, the heated seats, the backup camera, the monthly payment. $812. I looked at my mother at that moment and saw something cross her face for just a fraction of a second. Not pride, not concern, but a practiced blankness. The look of a woman who has been quietly doing arithmetic in her head for months and has been coming up short. That night, after Derek and Lisa and the kids had gone, I came downstairs and found my mother at the kitchen table with a folder open in front of her. A utility bill, a statement from the cardiologist she had recently started seeing, a notice from the mortgage servicer. She closed the folder when she heard me, but not quite fast enough. "Mom," I said, sitting down across from her, "how are you actually doing?" She looked at me the way she always did when I asked her a direct question, with a combination of surprise and gratitude that broke something small in me every single time. "Oh, she said, Dad's pension covers most of it." "And what doesn't it cover?" She looked at her hands. "I've been dipping into savings some months." "It's fine." "How much is left in savings?" A long pause. "A little under $4,000. That was $11,000 gone in 3 years. Not on anything extravagant. On a cardiologist. On a leaking porch roof. On an electric bill that had crept up because she kept the house warmer than my father had ever permitted. Because it was her house now, finally. And she was 62 years old and she was cold. She had not told a single person. She had not wanted to be a burden. I flew back to Austin on Sunday morning. On Monday I called my accountant, Marcus Ellison, and told him I needed to set up a dedicated transfer account. We called it the Harwell Fund. I set the automatic wire at $12,000 per month, beginning the 1st of April. Marcus drafted a simple allocation. $3,200 for the mortgage and property taxes, $1,400 for Ruth's health insurance premiums and medical copays, $1,200 for utilities and regular home maintenance, $2,000 held in reserve, and the remaining $3,200 deposited each month into an investment account I had quietly opened in my mother's name through a financial advisor named Margaret Voss, who had offices on South High Street in downtown Columbus. I called my mother that same evening. I told her I had arranged financial support and that she would see a monthly deposit beginning April 1st. I told her the amount. She went completely silent. Then she said, "Nora, I cannot accept this." I said, "You're not accepting it. I'm giving it." "There is a difference." She began to cry, very quietly, the way she cried when she was trying not to. I said, "Mom, I need you to do one thing for me. Please do not tell Derek." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "He wouldn't understand." I said, "I know." The second moment happened 14 months after that. Derek called me on a Thursday evening in May, which was unusual enough in itself to put me on alert. He needed money. He called it a loan, a bridge, just until his commission structure got sorted at the logistics company. He said he needed $8,000. I told him I couldn't do it right now, and I said it gently. He said, "Are you serious? You're in Austin doing your little consultant thing, and you can't help your own brother?" I let the silence sit for a breath, then said I hoped things worked out and that he could call me if he needed to talk. He hung up. 3 weeks later, he called my mother. She gave him $2,000. It was money from the reserve account, which meant it was mine. He never paid it back. He never asked where it came from. He took it and drove home and forgot about the transaction by the following Monday, the way a man forgets the name of a waiter once the food has arrived. That happened 4 more times over the next 2 years, each time between $800 and $2,000. Each time sourced from the emergency reserve I had built precisely for real emergencies. Each time treated by Derek as a transaction with the universe rather than with a person. He kept the money. He kept his easy posture. He kept arriving at Harwell Drive for Sunday dinners and holidays, accepting the comfort I was funding. never once pausing to wonder why a woman on a fixed pension with a 30-year-old house and regular medical appointments could continue to be quite so generous with her son. And then came December. I had flown in from Austin 2 days before the Sunday dinner. The first night I helped my mother reorganize the pantry and watched old movies on the couch until 11. Friday morning she made biscuits, and we sat at the kitchen table with coffee for 3 hours and talked about nothing in particular. Her garden, my firm, a novel she was reading about a woman who walks across Spain, the kind of unhurried conversation that had become the best thing in my life, and the one I protected most carefully. Saturday, I drove to the grocery store and helped her prep for the next day's dinner. She made her green bean casserole standing at the counter, humming something I half recognized from childhood. Sunday dinner was Ruth's December tradition, a ritual she had maintained for 19 consecutive years without interruption. She invited family the third Sunday of every December, and the gathering this year seated 11, Ruth at the head of the table, Derek and Lisa with their teenagers, Max, now 13, and Callie, now 10, Aunt Carol and her husband Phil, cousins Dennis and Kay from my father's side, Brian beside me, and me. The food was my mother's best. A honey-glazed ham she had started the night before. Her green bean casserole made from scratch because she refused the canned version on principle. Roasted sweet potatoes with butter and rosemary. Homemade rolls she had been up since 7 in the morning making in batches. The table looked the way it had always looked at the holidays. Warm and full and carefully arranged, the good china out, the tablecloth she only used at Thanksgiving and Christmas, ironed smooth, the centerpiece a simple arrangement of pine branches and white candles she had put together the previous afternoon. My mother had done all of this. I had helped with what she would let me help with. Derek arrived at 4:53 in the afternoon, walked directly past the kitchen where Ruth and I had been working since noon, walked to the couch, accepted a beer from Lisa's tote bag, and watched football until my mother announced, in the specific tone that meant dinner was on the table and patients had concluded, that everyone should come and sit down. We were 40 minutes into the meal when Derek stood up. There had been easy conversation before that, comfortable and mostly pleasant. Phil had told a long story about a neighbor's snowblower. Kay had asked me about my firm, and I had answered briefly and honestly, and she had said, with real warmth, "Nora, that's wonderful." Derek had been quiet for most of it, the particular quiet he got when the attention was pointed somewhere other than himself. I noticed it. I had been noticing it for 34 years. He tapped the edge of his beer bottle with a knife. He said, "I just want to say something." And then he said it. The speech came out with the tone of someone who genuinely believes they are being courageous rather than cruel. He said my name the way he had said it my entire life, like a piece of furniture he had been carefully stepping around and was finally moving out to the curb. He sat back down and looked at the table with the satisfaction of a man who has fulfilled a duty. My mother said Derek again, and this time there was something harder under her voice, something she had been holding for a long time. Aunt Carol set her fork on the plate very deliberately and looked at him with an expression I recognized as the front edge of a sentence she had not yet decided to say out loud. I looked at Brian. His jaw was tight. I gave him the smallest shake of my head. Not yet. I picked up my fork and took a bite of the sweet potato. "Delicious, Mom," I said. "The rosemary is perfect this year." Derek stared at me. He had expected something, a defense, tears, a fight, a wounded exit. The absence of any of it confused him at a level deeper than he would have been able to articulate. He opened his mouth again. "I'm just saying what people have been thinking." "Okay," I said, and I kept eating. "If you are still here with me right now, I want you to pause for 1 second and drop a comment below with just the words, 'I see you.' Because if this story is landing somewhere real for you, if you know what it feels like to quietly hold something together while someone else takes the credit out loud, I want to know you're there. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do it right now. Because what I did next is where this whole story turns." I flew back to Austin on Wednesday morning. Brian and I sat in the terminal at John Glenn International Airport, Gate B14, departure at 8:20 in the morning, and I told him my plan. I laid it out the way I would explain a strategic restructure to a client, methodically, calmly, with a clear sequence and a defined outcome. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said one thing. "Are you sure?" I said yes. He said, "Then I'm with you." That was the entire conversation. 14 years of marriage in 11 words. That Thursday, I called Margaret Voss. She had been managing the Harwell Fund for 6 years, and she had a voice that made every decision feel like it had already been made correctly. I told her what I was planning. She listened without interruption. Then she said she would prepare a full 6-year accounting of all contributions, disbursements, reserve transactions, and the current investment balance. 2 weeks, she said. And then she paused. "Nora, I also want to say, what you did for your mother was the right thing. And what you're about to do is also the right thing. Those two things don't contradict each other." I thanked her and ended the call. I called my mother that same evening. It was 7:40 in the evening, Austin time, 8:40 in Columbus. She was in her reading chair. I could tell by the particular quality of the quiet around her voice. I told her I was canceling the wire transfers. I told her I wanted her to know before anything changed. And I told her that a formal family meeting with Margaret would bring the full picture into the open for everyone. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "How long have you been planning this?" I said, "Since December 15th. She said that was 2 days after the dinner. I said, "Yes." A longer silence. Then, very softly, "Nora, what happens to the house?" I said. "Nothing happens to the house. The investment account has enough to carry the mortgage for 14 months while we plan the next step, together, as a family." She said, "Derek doesn't know any of this." I said, "He will." On January 1st, the transfer did not arrive. For the first time in 73 months, the Harwell Fund received $0 from Callaway Consulting Group. February's mortgage was covered from the reserve. Ruth's medical insurance was paid from the investment account. From the outside, nothing appeared to have changed. But the architecture had shifted. The weight was now resting on different ground. I sent a formal email to Derek and Lisa in the second week of January, copied to Aunt Carol, Dennis, and Kay. Subject line: Family Financial Planning Meeting, February 22nd. The body read simply, "As we think about Mom's long-term financial security, I have asked our family's financial advisor, Margaret Voss, to walk us through the full picture. Her office is on South High Street, 2 o'clock. Please make every effort to attend." Derek replied at 11:23 the next morning. "What is this about? Is Mom sick? Why are you sending emails like a lawyer instead of just calling?" I did not reply. Lisa texted me privately 2 hours later asking if everything was okay. I wrote back, "Everything is fine. We want to make sure Mom's future is handled properly. See you on the 22nd. She sent a thumbs up emoji and I set the phone down. The weeks between January and February were ordinary working weeks for me. Client calls, a proposal deadline, a staff hiring decision. I ran 3 miles every morning, made dinner with Brian on Tuesday nights, and called my mother every Sunday. She sounded steadier with each call. Lighter, somehow, as if a pressure that had lived in her chest for 6 years had begun to ease, not disappear, but release enough to breathe around. I called Aunt Carol on the 8th of February. Carol was 69 and possessed the quality I most valued in people who had lived long enough to stop performing. She had no patience for theater and no fear of an uncomfortable silence. I told her plainly what the meeting was about and what the documents would show. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Your mother told me some of it, not the full amount." I said, "How much did she tell you?" Carol said, "Enough to know that boy has been living in a story that has nothing to do with reality." A pause. "I'll be there. February 22nd, a Saturday." The offices of Margaret Voss, KPA, were on the 4th floor of a building on South High Street in downtown Columbus, a quiet professional suite with gray carpet and wide east-facing windows letting in flat winter light. I arrived at 1:45. Margaret was already there. The documents printed and bound, 1 copy per person, arranged on the long conference table facing the door. 7 chairs. A carafe of water. No coffee. This was not meant to feel social. My mother arrived with Aunt Carol at 1:52 in the afternoon. Ruth was wearing her blue wool coat, the church one. She looked composed. She had known this day was coming for 6 weeks, and she had made her peace with it the way she made peace with most things. Quietly, in the reading chair, over the course of enough evenings alone with her thoughts, she squeezed my hand when she sat down, said nothing. It was enough. Dennis and Kay arrived at 1:58. Dennis nodded at me the way he always did. Steady, uncomplicated. There. Kay touched my shoulder briefly. Derek and Lisa walked in at 2:07. Derek had the energy of a man who has decided before entering a room that nothing in it is going to be a significant development. He shook Margaret's hand, looked around the table, picked up the bound document in front of him, glanced at the cover page and set it back down without reading further. "What is all this?" he said. Margaret said pleasantly and without inflection, "Please have a seat. We'll cover everything once you're settled." He sat. Lisa sat beside him. Margaret opened the meeting at 2:11. She introduced herself, named her role in her relationship to the family account, and explained that she would be presenting a complete financial picture of the past 72 months as a foundation for planning Ruth's financial future. She said clearly that there were no legal emergencies, no crises, and no debt. She said she simply wanted the family to have full and accurate information before making any decisions. Then she turned to the first section of the document. The wire transfer summary ran 3 pages. Month by month, starting April 1st, 6 years ago. $12,000. The following month, $12,000 again. 60 consecutive months. Source, Callaway Consulting Group. Account holder, Nora E. Callaway. Total contributions over 72 months, $864,000. Margaret read that figure aloud. She said it at a normal pace, without emphasis. $864,000. The room held still. The specific kind of stillness that arrives when a number lands and no one yet knows what it means for them personally. I did not look at Derek. I looked at my mother. She was looking at her hands, folded on top of the document in front of her. She did not look up. Derek said, "I'm sorry." "What?" The ease in his voice was gone. In its place was something flatter and more careful. Margaret said, "Over the past 72 months, Nora has been funding a dedicated account, the Harwell Fund, that has covered the mortgage and property taxes on your mother's home at 42 Harwell Drive, Ruth's health insurance premiums and all medical copays, utilities, routine home maintenance, and an investment reserve in Ruth's name." She turned to the next page. The mortgage on Harwell Drive is current. Property taxes are current. Ruth's investment account currently holds a balance of $123,000, Derek said. "Mom." Not a question. Just a word, landing at the beginning of something he didn't know how to finish. Ruth looked up at him. Her expression was not apologetic. She said simply, "She asked me not to say anything." "For 6 years," he said. "Yes," said my mother. Margaret continued. She turned to the page that itemized reserve disbursements. She read each line item aloud. She noted the 5 occasions over the past 4 years on which Ruth had requested funds from the reserve account for family assistance, amounts totaling $9,400. She noted that none of those funds had been returned to the account. She did not say Derek's name. She did not have to. There was only one person in that room who had taken money from Ruth and never brought it back. Lisa had gone still beside Derek. Not the stillness of waiting, the stillness of understanding something fully for the first time and not yet knowing what to do with the understanding. Margaret set down the document. "The final item," she said, "is the current transfer status." She paused for just a moment. "Effective January 1st of this year, the monthly wire transfer from Callaway Consulting Group to the Harwell Fund has been discontinued." The room was very quiet. Derek's face moved through a sequence of expressions I observed without commentary. Confusion first, then the arithmetic, visibly working. Then something that had no easy name, a kind of slow, unwilling dismantling. His jaw tightened. He looked at me. For the first time since he had walked through that door at 2:07 in the afternoon, he looked at me directly. His voice, when it came, was quieter than I expected. The performance had drained out of it entirely. "Why?" he said. I thought about all the things I could say. I thought about the dining room table and the eggnog and the word freeloader spoken in front of 11 people, including my husband and my aunt. I thought about that Thursday in the airport, Brian beside me saying, "I'm with you." I thought about my mother at the kitchen table with the folder of bills she had tried to close before I could see it. I thought about the bourbon my father had opened when Derek got into Ohio State. "Because," I said quietly, "you called me a freeloader at Mom's dinner table in front of my husband and 11 other people. And I decided I was done doing the work in silence." I looked back at Margaret. "Thank you." Margaret gave a small, professional nod. The room did not gasp. It simply remained still, the way a space does when something has been said so completely that there is nothing left to say around it. Aunt Carol, on my left, straightened slightly in her chair. Kay's hand moved on the table. Dennis looked at the window. Lisa looked at Derek. Derek's mouth opened. It closed. He put both palms flat on the table in front of him and looked at them as if they might tell him something useful. The meeting concluded at 4:20 in the afternoon. Margaret outlined the options for the investment account going forward and explained the timeline for the reserve. 14 months of runway, during which the family could plan a sustainable long-term structure for Ruth's financial security. She described 3 scenarios with different contribution arrangements and suggested a follow-up meeting in April to select a path. Everyone received their copy of the bound documentation to take home. There were no raised voices. There was no scene. Lisa did not say anything during the financial portion of the meeting. Dennis and Kay listened carefully and asked 1 or 2 practical clarifying questions. Aunt Carol said nothing for the duration of the meeting, but I felt her there, beside me, a 69-year-old woman who had known this family for 5 decades, sitting straight-backed and present in her chair. And her presence meant something I had not known I needed until I felt it. The gray February sky pressed evenly against the windows the entire time. In the parking lot on South High Street, Derek found me at my rental car. Lisa had taken the teenagers to their vehicle. Aunt Carol and my mother were still inside with Margaret going through the investment account details. Derek stood in front of me in his fleece jacket, hands pushed down into the pockets. A man of 44 who in that moment looked more honestly his age than I had seen him in years. The performance had entirely left his face. What was in its place was harder to look at and more real. He said, "I didn't know." I said, "I know you didn't. You could have told me. Would you have believed it?" He didn't answer that. He looked at the sidewalk for a moment. Then he looked back up. "I've been taking credit for things for a long time." I said nothing. "I drove her to that cardiologist in March." "You did," I said. That mattered. Something moved in his face, the complicated mixture of a person who has just been made to see themselves clearly and isn't yet sure whether they are capable of what that clarity will require of them. "What do I do now?" he asked. It was a sincere question. I took it seriously. "You figure out what you can actually give," I said. "Not what looks good, what's real. And then you give that consistently." I opened the car door. Not to me, to her. I drove back to Harwell Drive. My mother was already there when I arrived, as she somehow always managed to be. She was standing at the kitchen counter with both hands around a mug of tea, not making anything, just standing. She looked at me when I came through the door and her eyes were wet, but not with grief. With something more layered than that. The look of a woman who has been quietly protected for a long time and has only just been permitted to know the full shape of it. She said, "You never wanted any credit for it." I said, "No." "Why not?" I thought about it for a moment honestly. "Because I wasn't doing it for credit," I said. "I was doing it because you are my mother." She put her arms around me. I stood in the kitchen at 42 Harwell Drive, in the house I had grown up in and held up from 1,400 miles away, and I let her hold me. I thought about all the years I had moved through those rooms like furniture no one noticed, and all the years I had quietly kept the walls from shifting, and how neither of those things canceled the other. Both were true, they just lived in different parts of the story. In the weeks that followed, things moved the way they always do after a long truth finally reaches the surface. Not dramatically, not with a clean narrative arc, but in human proportions. Slowly, incrementally. With setbacks that didn't announce themselves and progress that felt smaller than you expected until you stepped back and measured it. Derek did not call me for 8 days. On day 9, a Tuesday evening, he called and asked about the investment account timeline and what Margaret had recommended for sustaining it going forward. It was a practical question. It was not an apology. But it was a man engaging with a reality he had previously been content to ignore, and that was a different kind of beginning. Lisa called the following Saturday morning at 9:15. She said the word sorry early in the conversation, and she meant it without theatrical weight, just plainly as a fact she was handing over. She said, "I want you to know I've been telling Derek for years that he doesn't see what you do. I should have been louder about it. That's on me too." I told her I appreciated her saying so. Then she asked, directly and practically, "What does your mom actually need going forward? Not the financial document. What does she actually need day to day that we can be giving?" That question, that single question, asked without self-protection or defensiveness, told me more about Lisa than a decade of holiday small talk had managed to convey. We talked for 40 minutes about Ruth's medical appointments, about the house maintenance schedule, about what it would mean for someone to show up on a regular Tuesday for no reason other than to be there. It was the most useful conversation I had ever had with my sister-in-law, and it made me think more generously about the years she had spent beside a man whose blind spots were not her invention, even if she had sometimes helped maintain them. 2 weeks after the meeting, Derek drove to Harwell Drive on a Saturday morning and cleaned the gutters, which had been waiting since October. He stayed for dinner. He helped Ruth carry the heavy dining chairs down from where they'd been stored in the upstairs closet since Christmas. My mother told me about it on Sunday morning on the phone. Her voice had something careful and tentative in it, the way you hold something you aren't yet sure is stable. "He stayed 3 hours, she said. "He didn't talk about himself once the whole time." I said, "That's something?" She said, "I know. I won't tell you Derek became a different man overnight. That kind of transformation isn't real and doesn't hold when it is. But something structural had changed. Something that had previously been invisible, the actual architecture of care. Who built it and who had maintained it and who had simply occupied it for decades without once looking at the walls, was now visible to everyone in the room. You cannot unsee something once it has been placed in front of you in a bound document at a conference table. You can minimize it. You can work around it. But it remains seen. Derek knew now. That knowledge had weight. What he chose to do with that weight was going to be his own story to live or not live. There is something I have been sitting with in the months since February, turning it over the way you turn a stone that keeps catching the light from a different angle. I have been thinking about what it means to give without being acknowledged, and whether the absence of acknowledgement diminishes what was given. For 72 months I wired $12,000 into a fund that kept a house standing, kept a woman healthy, kept a brother comfortable in a story about himself that had no basis in fact. And in all that time, not one person at that dining room table understood whose name was on the structure they were all living inside. I do not say that to accumulate credit now. I say it because there is a version of this story in which the invisibility would have broken something essential in me. A more brittle version of me, or a more frightened one, might have allowed that. Instead, what the invisibility did was confirm something I think I have always known in the most private part of myself. The work is the point, not the recognition of the work. The work itself. I am not certain I would do it differently. Except for this, I would have been honest with myself sooner about what the sustained invisibility was costing me. Not financially, The financial part was manageable and genuinely did not hurt me. The emotional cost was more subtle and more accumulated. The quiet, practiced acceptance of being unseen is not strength. Sometimes it is just a habit you developed because being seen was never safe in the house where you grew up. Learning to tell the difference between genuine dignity and learned smallness. That is the work of a lifetime, and I am still in the middle of it. My mother and I talk every Sunday morning. That has not changed. What has changed is the texture of those conversations. There is less weight in them now, less of the careful navigation around things we were both not saying. She told me 2 weeks ago that she had finally signed up for a watercolor class at the community center, something she had wanted to do for 12 years and had always found a reason to defer. She signed up on a Tuesday, paid the fee herself from the investment account, and told me about it on Sunday with a brightness in her voice that I had not heard in a long time. I said, "Mom, that's wonderful." She said, "I know." Just that, she knew. She was allowed to know. Derek and I are finding, in increments too small to call a reconciliation and too real to dismiss, a way to be honest with each other that we have never quite managed before. It is awkward. It is sometimes clumsy. Last month, he called me to tell me he had set up an automatic payment for half of Ruth's monthly utility bill, $140 a month, going directly to her account. He said it with a self-consciousness that told me he knew it was both small and real at the same time. I said, "Thank you, Derek." He said, "It's not much." I said, "It's consistent. That's what matters." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm trying to be better at the actual thing instead of the version of the thing." I said, "I know you are." And I meant it, not as absolution, just as observation. I can see someone trying. I can acknowledge a real attempt without pretending it erases 20 years of not trying. Both things can be true at the same time. That is what I have learned about families. They hold contradictions the way old houses hold drafts. You do not seal them perfectly. You learn to live in the house anyway and be warm in spite of them. I flew back to Austin on a Monday evening in late February. The flight departed at 5:50 in the evening. Brian picked me up from baggage claim and handed me a coffee from the place I liked. Oat milk. 1 sugar. No sleeve, because the cup is already double-walled. Exactly as I take it, without being asked, because he has been paying attention for 14 years and that is simply who he is. We drove home through Austin's west side in the dark. The city moved past the windows, warm-lit and familiar, and I sat with my coffee and watched it. I didn't say much. He didn't push. We had learned a long time ago that I need the drive home to decompress before I can talk about anything that mattered, and he had never once tried to rush that process. Eventually, somewhere on the Mar, he said, "How do you feel?" I thought about it for a real while, the way the question deserved, like something that had been carrying me without my permission has finally been put down, I said. He nodded. He kept driving. He understood, which is its own kind of profound. Being understood without explanation is one of the rarest things. If you have it, guard it. If you don't have it yet, keep it as your standard. On a Sunday evening in March, about 3 weeks after the February meeting, my mother called me at 7:30 in the evening. She had something to say and I could hear her composing it as the phone rang. When I picked up, she said, "I have been thinking about something and I need to say it to you properly." I said, "Okay." She said, "I let it happen. Not just the money, not just Derek, all of it. Your whole life I chose the easier version of things. I chose to believe that because you were quiet, you were fine. I chose to not push back when your father didn't celebrate you. I chose to let Derek take up the space because it was less complicated than making him share it. And that was not fair to you, and I have known it for a long time, and I am telling you now that I'm sorry for it." She said all of this in one long breath and then waited. I sat with it for a moment, a real moment, not a polite one. Then I said, "Thank you for saying that. I needed to hear it." She said, "I should have said it 30 years ago." I said, "You're saying it now." She said, "It's your day bat. Is that enough?" I thought about that honestly. It's real, I said, and real is worth more than perfect timing. That conversation was the one I had been carrying longer than any financial document. The money was significant. The apology from my mother, unprompted, plainly said, without waiting for me to coax it out of her, was the part that actually put something down. There is a difference between someone knowing they owe you an apology and someone deciding on their own that you deserve to receive it. My mother made that decision on a Sunday in March at 7:30 in the evening, and I will hold that for the rest of my life. If you are watching this, and you are the Nora in your family, the one whose name is on the architecture that everyone else inhabits without reading it, the one who holds the structure in silence while someone else makes the toast, I want to ask you one direct question. Not about revenge and not about tactics, about your own honest ledger. Do you know what you are actually giving? In time, in money, in presence, in invisible daily maintenance that no one is counting? Because you deserve to know the value of what you bring, even if no one else has been keeping the books. Not to weaponize it, not to hold it over anyone, just to see it clearly, just to stop negotiating with yourself about whether you are enough. You are enough. You have always been enough. And the measure of a person is not who makes the toast at the dinner table. It is who made the table possible. Before I go, one question, and I'd like you to sit with it honestly. If your family held a meeting tomorrow and someone placed a complete accounting on the table of everything you have quietly given, in time, in money, in labor, in love that was never acknowledged, what would that document show? And what would it change? Leave your answer below. I read every single comment, and I mean that. Thank you for being here with me today. If this story reached you somewhere real, share it with someone you think needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't already. And I will see you in the next one. To every single woman who has carried something heavy in silence and wondered if anyone was paying attention, this channel is paying attention. We are here every week with the stories that don't make the loudest noise but carry the most weight. The quietest women are so often the ones building the world that everyone else lives in. We see you. We are not going anywhere. The loudest comebacks are built in silence, and your story is just getting started. Until next time, keep building. Let them find out